At this time, let me introduce Penny Bernard-Shaver, who has the honor of introducing our guest speaker today.
Good morning. I'm very excited to be here, and thanks to the League for all their work on creating good government and strong democracy in our country. And I'm very excited to be able to introduce Matt Rothschild. I've known Matt for a number of years. I hate to say how many. Matt was the editor of the Progressive magazine and has been with Democracy Campaign now for several years. He's soon to be a published author of a book titled 12 Ways to Make Wisconsin's Democracy Work. I'm very excited to hear about that book and about the Fair Maps issue and the work that's being done to help make sure that Wisconsin actually has fair maps. Upcoming, hopefully in the next 2 years, we can get that done. And here's to Matt for making all that hard work happen. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Penny. It's great to be with everybody. I want to thank the Appleton League for the invitation. I want to thank Penny for that introduction. I'm so impressed with all the work that everyone's doing. I'm impressed with what Elena and Grace have done and all the work you did for the centennial over the past year. I do want to salute Pat Finder-Stone, who died a year and a half ago, who brought me to the Appleton League several times. And I think of her when I think of Appleton and the League. I'm a huge admirer of the work that the League does.
I worked with her.
Leaders, Andrea Kaminsky was a tremendous statewide leader, as was Aaron Grunze. Deborah Cronmiller, your new executive director statewide, is a tremendous person that I work in coalition with a lot on not just this issue of gerrymandering, but the issue of voter suppression and voting rights and other issues across the board, including racial equity. So my hat's off to the League. You guys are some of the real champions, the real stalwarts of democracy in this state and in the country. And before I dive into this issue of the day, redistricting, I'd be remiss if I didn't discuss what's been happening in this country and in this state, especially given Jean's highlighting of the two values of empowering voters and defending democracy, because our democracy has been under unprecedented assault over the last several weeks. We have seen something that we've never seen before, a president who refuses to pledge to have a peaceful transition of power, if you can believe that. A president who refuses to concede when the evidence is overwhelming that he has lost and perpetuates a myth about a fraud. And demands that the results of the election be overturned. And we've never seen anything like this before in our history, and we cannot normalize it. And we can't deny the risks that are out there still. And we can't give a pass to the officials in Wisconsin, our own officials, who've aided and abetted this assault on our democracy. Ron Johnson, Tom Tiffany, Robin Voss, Scott Fitzgerald, Ron Tussler. I mean, that hearing yesterday, and I watched as much of it as my stomach could take, was a disgrace. It was a hugely lopsided hearing that perpetuated a whole bunch of myths and spread a bunch of unsubstantiated claims, refused to let the Democratic members on the panel have adequate time for questions, refused to let the person who runs the staff, the Wisconsin Elections Commission, even come before the committee and testify. So this is a huge concern of mine, and it's not going to end on January 20th. There is a very scary anti-democratic small d movement in this country. It's not just Donald Trump. He's ginned it up, but it's not just him. There are millions of people in this country who have fallen under his spell, or who are part of a white supremacist movement, an authoritarian movement, a fascist movement that is so hostile to democracy, the likes of which we haven't seen in this country since pro-Nazi sympathizers waved Nazi flags in Madison Square Garden in the late 1930s. I mean, my father fought the Nazis in Europe. And if he were alive today and saw Nazi flags being flown in the streets of the United States, he would be aghast, to say the least. So I'm very concerned about the fate of our democracy in this country. This is the scariest moment for democracy, period, in the United States in my 62 years of being on this earth. And so I just think we need to recognize that that these risks are going to persist, and that a lot of our work is going to need to be figuring out how do we deflate this bubble of authoritarianism that is threatening the very foundation of our work and the values that we at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign stand for, and the values, as Jean was pointing out, that the League of Women Voters stands for. It's a scary moment, this combination of authoritarianism and rising white supremacy. And so that's the context I think we're living in. I'm happy to engage in conversation with any of you at a separate time about this huge issue of the authoritarian movement that's going on in Wisconsin and around the country. But I do want to hit this question of gerrymandering and redistricting, which is what I spend a lot of my time on. And it's been a very gratifying movement to be a part of here in Wisconsin because, first of all, we're working in coalition with the League, which does a tremendous amount of work locally and the state level and now nationally on banning gerrymandering. We're working in coalition with Common Cause. We're working in coalition with the Fair Elections Project and a couple other really good groups. I know the Wisconsin Farmers Union is very interested in this issue as well and is giving some resources to it. So one of the great things about working in Wisconsin is that the pro-democracy, nonprofit, nonpartisan sector is so united. And we don't engage in a lot of petty turf battles or ego battles or stuff like that. So I love working with the League and other groups on this issue. The Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, let me just say a word or two about what we are. We've been around for 25 years. We expose money in politics in Wisconsin, and we advocate for a range of pro-democracy reforms, including banning gerrymandering so that we can get to a democracy where everyone has an equal voice. That's what democracy means to us. And as Penny said, I have a book coming out in September from University of Wisconsin Press about 12 ways to improve democracy. Banning gerrymandering is one, lowering or lessening the ability of big money and dark money to influence our elections is another, money in politics. Uprooting racism is one, and getting to a situation of economic equality is another big one, and there are others, but that's for another time. Let me talk about gerrymandering. What is gerrymandering? And where did that funny word come from? Well, the funny word is an American word, and it came out of the early part of the 19th century when the governor of Massachusetts, whose name was Gary or Jerry, Gerry, he was trying to rig a map to advance his own political party's interest. And he drew a map that was so funny shaped that it looked like a mythic salamander. So people put the name of Jerry and salamander together to get gerrymander. And that's how the word entered into the lexicon. It's been with us ever since. It's a little bit of historical etymology that I didn't know until I came to the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. So that's kind of fun for me to learn that along the road. So gerrymandering is the process by which a political party in power redistricts the district maps to benefit itself, to strengthen its stranglehold on power. Redistricting has to happen constitutionally by the US Constitution every 10 years after the census. And every district needs to have roughly the same number of people in it. And because people move in and move out of a district over 10 years, the populations are different. And so you have to redraw the maps. How you redraw the maps and who redraws the maps is the big question. If it's the political party that has total dominance and control of, say, as in Wisconsin, the state Senate, the state assembly, and the governorship, as happened in 2011, that party can rig the maps in their favor. The Democrats could have solved this problem in 2009. And let me be clear at the outset, gerrymandering is wrong when Democrats do it. Gerrymandering is wrong when Republicans do it. No one should be able to have the power by moving a line here or moving a line there on the map to increase the probability that they'll be able to stay in power for 10 more years. I mean, that's crazy. So in 2009, the Democrats actually had the state assembly, had the state senate, and had the governorship with Governor Jim Doyle. And actually, there were some good Democrats. Penny, you were there at the time, weren't you? There were some good Democrats who wanted to pass a bill to ban gerrymandering and give us nonpartisan redistricting. Penny was involved in it. Jeff Smith, who was chair of a committee on the assembly side, actually, they had a hearing about it. And people testified why it's important to ban gerrymandering in Wisconsin. But lo and behold, the leadership of the party didn't want to bring it to a vote. And so they missed a huge opportunity to solve this problem, to ban gerrymandering in Wisconsin. Why didn't they bring it to a vote? Because political power is the most intoxicating drug there is on the market. When you have it, you don't think you're going to lose it. And they thought, the leaders anyway, thought that Democrats were going to win in 2010 and would be able to rig the maps for themselves, frankly. And that just didn't happen. What happened in 2010 was Scott Walker won the election for governor, and Republicans swept the Democrats out of the state Senate and swept the Democrats out of the state assembly. And so the Republicans wasted no time in getting the same census data and rigging the maps for themselves. And actually, they brought in a political scientist from Oklahoma, of all places, to come to Madison with his computer and his demographic skills and his software skills. And they didn't draw the maps in the Capitol. They didn't do the people's business in the people's house. Rather, they went across the street into the glass bank on the square in Madison. I'm sure you've seen it if you've been to Madison. And they did it in the law offices of a conservative law firm called Michael Best and Friedrich, in a room that became known as the map room. And the map room was a locked map room. And the media wasn't involved in the locked map room where they were drawing the new maps, which was their constitutional duty. The public wasn't invited in. You weren't invited in. The Democrats weren't invited in. Even Republicans who weren't in positions of leadership couldn't get into the locked map room unless they got permission from the speaker or the two young male staffers of the speaker who held the keys to the locked map room. And once they were allowed in the locked map room, they could look only at their own redrawn district. And before they could leave the locked map room, they had to swear an oath of secrecy. Now, that is not how the business of democracy is supposed to be conducted. That is 180 degrees from open and transparent government. And so that was a bad process. And we need to have a better process than that. We need to have a public and transparent process. What were they doing in the locked map room? Well, they were creating 9 incarnations of maps. Each map kept a couple things constant: the total number of voters who were going to vote, predicted to vote in the next elections, and their affiliations. They kept those constant, and all they did was move lines on the map. They had 9 incarnations of maps. Each successive map predicted, by moving lines more aggressively, that Republicans would gain more seats in the legislature, with everything else being held equal. And lo and behold, they knew exactly what they were doing. In 2018, for instance, Democrats statewide in assembly races won 54% of the votes, and Republicans got 63% of the seats. And that's some pretty good rigging if you can get away with it, and they got away with it. For a while there, it looked like they weren't going to get away with it because there was a lawsuit called the Whitford case that was filed in federal court here by a bunch of Democrats who were saying that their constitutional rights were infringed upon: their right to speech, their right to freedom of association, and under the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. 3 federal judges, including 2 who were appointed by Republicans in Madison, agreed and said this was one of the worst gerrymanders in modern American history, and that the plaintiffs had their constitutional rights violated. It went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court punted on a technicality and sent it back to the federal court in Madison to hear the case again. But before the federal court could hear the case again, the U.S. Supreme Court took on 2 other cases involving gerrymandering. And it was a great opportunity for the U.S. Supreme Court to finally say that hyper-partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional, like the judges said here. One case was so perfect because there was gerrymandering going on by Democrats and gerrymandering going on by Republicans. Maryland, there was a case against Democrats in Maryland who had totally rigged the maps to favor Democrats in Maryland, and then there was a case from North Carolina where Republicans had totally rigged the maps for Republicans. So the U.S. Supreme Court heard a combination of those two cases, and I thought there was a good chance that they might rule to ban partisan gerrymandering. But what did Chief Justice Roberts, who cast the deciding vote, do instead? Well, on the one hand, he recognized, and this was a direct quote, that hyperpartisan gerrymandering is incompatible with democratic principles. But then on the other hand, he said, and this isn't a direct quote, go away, don't ever come back. I don't want to hear from you again. In fact, no federal judge should be able to decide these court cases on hyperpartisan gerrymandering. It's non-justiciable. It's beyond the reach of the judiciary. This is a political issue that should be resolved at the state level, he said, even though he recognized that it was incompatible with democratic principles, which was kind of outrageous that as Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court, seeing democratic principles violated, didn't do anything about it. So he sent it back to the states. And so it creates a kind of a chicken and egg problem in states like ours, where the political party that's in power has already rigged the maps. How are you going to fix things? And what exactly is the hardship or the harm of gerrymandering, other than it's rigged for one political party and is unfair? The problem is that it leads to uncompetitive districts, so that elected officials or candidates don't have to listen to a huge chunk of the population because it's a safe district. It leads to hyperpartisanship and a loss of just basic common courtesy. In Madison, I've been to hearings where one side has so much power, the people running the meetings, just like happened yesterday, are incredibly rude, not only to the public and to witnesses who want to testify against something that the dominant party, holds true or believes in strongly, but they're rude to the minority members of their own legislature. The lack of common decency is apparent when you're at those panels. Fundamentally, what gerrymandering does is it makes the voice of the people not matter. The people don't get what they want because the legislators don't have to listen to what the people want. So one of the reasons why, 83% of the public wants increased spending on Medicaid, or over 80% of the public wants the legalization of medical marijuana. We're not getting it. We're not getting it largely in part because of gerrymandering, also in part because of money in politics. So those are problems, real fundamental problems of gerrymandering, which is antithetical to democracy and to fair play. And I think a lot of Wisconsinites still today want a fair, level playing field and don't want people to fix the rules of the game. And for people who are athletic, like Elena and Grace, I see are athletes. I mean, you want a fair game and a fair referee, and gerrymandering takes that away. So that's what's bad about gerrymandering. And so let me just bring it forward. What's likely to happen? We've had the census, or the census is just about done. The Census Bureau is going to deliver data sometime in the spring or early summer to legislators across the country. And here in Wisconsin, it is likely that the legislature, dominated by Republicans, is going to try to rig the maps again. And they're going to rig the maps, and one of a couple things are going to happen. They may try and end around Governor Evers. The governor has a legal right under Wisconsin law and Supreme Court rulings to veto or sign a map that's presented to him or to her. They may try to get around that by passing a joint resolution, which is something that the Assembly and the Senate can do, and that doesn't go to the governor's desk for a veto or a signature. They could then send it to the Wisconsin Supreme Court and hope that their conservative majority there would rubber stamp it. But the problem they have is that the conservative 4-3 majority is not a rubber stamp anymore, because Justice Hagedorn, surprisingly to many people, has turned out to be an independent justice, a swing vote who is not in lockstep with whatever Voss and Fitzgerald want him to do. And so that's refreshing to have a justice who isn't hyperpartisan. So that's not a guarantee. So what's likely to happen is they'll pass a bill, Evers will veto it. And there's going to then be lawyers rushing into courthouses, state courthouses, federal courthouses to try to change the maps. Democrats are going to try to change the maps in court. Republicans are going to try to get the maps affirmed by a judge in court. And it's going to be a lawyer's race. And you know, I don't know how you're going to, we're not going to watch that on ESPN, but who knows how that's going to end up. But in the meantime, what's happened in Wisconsin that is so exciting is that there's this huge grassroots movement that has just been bubbling up like nothing I've ever seen before over the last 5 years. I've got this map behind me that shows 55 counties in Wisconsin have told the legislature that they want to see independent, nonpartisan redistricting. 54 counties have passed resolutions, including Outagamie County, county board resolutions urging the legislature to give us independent, nonpartisan redistricting. And there have been like 28 referendums that have passed in counties saying the same thing to the legislature. And the neat thing is, most of this has happened over the last 2 or 3 years. It's been a huge snowball gathering steam as it rolls downhill. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Iowa invented the wheel 40 years ago, and they didn't put a patent on the idea. We can just steal the Iowa model. And the Iowa model says, rather than having the elected officials do the drawing of the maps, have career civil servants draw the maps with specific criteria that makes it sure that they can't use political demographic data, how people voted in this district or that district, to rig the maps. That the maps have to be regular shaped, they have to be contiguous, the districts have to be contiguous, they have to respect local districts and local communities and communities of interest. They can't be salamander shaped, they can't be weirdly designed. There's one map of a district in just north of Madison where a guy, if he goes out into the tree in his backyard and sits on 3 different limbs, is in 3 different districts. I mean, that's just an absurd way to draw a map. So we want just, clear lines, clear rules, no bias. And, people will say we're skeptical. Well, everyone's got a bias, but the Iowa model, it solves that problem by listing specific criteria that you can use and can't use when you're drawing these maps. And if you violate that, you're committing a crime. So that is what we've been advocating for a long time at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, and the League of Women Voters has been advocating the Iowa model, as has Common Cause. And so we're going to urge that. And there is going to be a piece of legislation introduced in the next session. There's been legislation in every session since 2009 anyway, to give us independent, nonpartisan redistricting. Here's another bit of good news. Last time, for the first time, there was more than one Republican co-sponsor. Pretty much it's been Todd Novak of Dodgeville has been co-sponsoring it. He's in by the way, not coincidentally, a very competitive district. And the people in his district want nonpartisan redistricting. This time, rather than just having one Republican co-sponsor, there were 5 Republican co-sponsors to this bill. And one, Jeff Mursaw, further north than you are, I think, was one of the co-sponsors. And he came on in a very interesting way because he was doing weekly Facebook polls of his constituents. He'd send out a question to his constituents, ask them how they felt on, increased spending for education or legalizing marijuana or whatever the issue is. One week, he sent out a poll question on independent, nonpartisan redistricting. And lo and behold, 78% of his constituents who responded said they were in favor of it. And so he became a co-sponsor. I called his office the next day when I heard that he became a co-sponsor, because I was surprised and delighted, and asked the nice woman in his office who answered the phone whether I could set up an appointment with him to come thank him. And a lot of legislators blow you off when you call and ask for a meeting, whether you're a citizen or you're a nonprofit executive like I am. And so I thought I was going to get the runaround. Instead, this nice woman said, well, what do you want to talk to him about? I said, well, I'd like to talk to him about his courageous vote on banning nonpartisan, on banning gerrymandering and giving us independent, nonpartisan redistricting. And she said, well, no need to set up an appointment. He's right here. Why don't you talk to him right now? And handed the phone to the legislator. And I just talked to him for a couple minutes and thanked him. And that was that. But that was a very instructive example for me, because a lot of times people get jaded that whatever they do doesn't matter. That the legislature is so partisan right now on both sides that it doesn't matter whether you call or not. But it's really important to engage in civic activism. And I don't need to tell league people that. That's what you guys do. That's your bread and butter. But here it worked well. And so let me just give you a couple things that we're urging people to do in this next year or so. The effort to ban gerrymandering is not going to happen, is not likely to succeed overnight. It may not succeed until 2024, but there are things we can do in between and constantly. I mean, I want this whole map behind me to turn purple. The purple is counties that have passed county board resolutions, and the deep purple are counties that have passed resolutions and referendums, and the referendums always pass by very large margins. So the one thing we can do when Senator Jeff Smith is going to introduce new legislation in January to give us independent nonpartisan redistricting, we can urge all of our legislators to sign on, become co-sponsors of that bill. And then we can urge legislators, especially Republican legislators, not to vote for any map that is rigged, that is drawn with a bad process like last time, and with just designs, hyper-partisan designs to push as many Democrats into as few districts as possible, for instance, which is one of the techniques, and thereby giving Republicans majority and a bigger majority in more districts. Just let's have a fair process, fair rules. Don't vote for a rigged map. And a thing we can do at the local level is urge our city council and county boards to write the legislature and urge them to start the map process with the local district lines, rather than redrawing things from the top down, which was an unprecedented way that they did it last time around. Respect local districts. And then the People's Maps Commission is going to come out with a fair, what they consider to be a fair map. Now, the People's Maps Commission is this entity that Governor Evers, to his credit, brought into being, and there are 9 commissioners on it. They've held hearings, including one in your district. I think on October 1st, they held a public hearing. They're going around the state getting public input, which is a great democratic process, small d, to get the input of people of the state about what they want as far as a fair map goes, or a process for drawing maps. So it's likely they're going to get hold of this census data too, the People's Maps Commission. They're going to try to draw maps that are fair, and then we'll be able to compare the maps that are done in the legislature with the People's Maps Commission, and there should be a good visual comparison there to make, contrast to make, and we in our public education efforts can say, look, here's the map that was drawn that's rigged in favor of the Republicans. Here's a map that was drawn in a nonpartisan way. You can see for yourself which one is better, and let's have the legislature adopt the People's Maps Commission map. Now, I'm not naive. That's probably not going to be adopted by the legislature, but it is good public education. We need to keep doing public education. And then in the next elections, and every time there's an election, we need to increase the pressure on every person in elective office and every candidate running for elective office to come around to supporting this issue of independent, nonpartisan redistricting. And if they don't support it, you have to tell them that you're not going to vote for them. That's a language they understand. And so I am hopeful that this pressure campaign from the grassroots is going to have an effect, that so much so that whoever is running at some point in the next 2 or 4 years is going to have to come around and say, yes, you're right. Let's just have a fair and level playing field here, and let's ban gerrymandering once and for all. We can solve it here at the state level. A lot of other states have solved it. Michigan solved it by referendum. We don't have the power of binding referendum in our state. We got to do it legislatively. We could try to amend the Constitution and then we'd be able to vote on referendum, but it still has got to go through the legislature first. It's a very exciting grassroots movement that's going on in Wisconsin. It gives me some faith in the process. I mean, if I were the Republicans and was just, if I'm Robin Voss, at some point I'm going to say, all right, you guys win, because we'll be all right anyway, because a lot of Democrats packed themselves anyway into Madison and Milwaukee. And this is actually an argument the Republicans use. You'll hear it a lot. They say, well, the Democrats congregate in Dane County and Milwaukee County. Well, if that's true, then why in 2011 did the Republicans go to such great lengths outside of Dane County and Milwaukee County to try to fix lines on maps that help them? I mean, Sheboygan was chopped in 2 or 3 ways. Marshfield was chopped in 2 or 3 ways. And so it's not just a problem that the Democrats create for themselves, but if they wanted to leave things the way they were and just left people in Dane County and Milwaukee County and thought that that was advantageous enough for them on the Republican side, they could do that. But they want to move and fix lines all over the state. And so I think we should expect that to happen again and fight against it when it does. I do want to say that gerrymandering is just part of a pro-democracy agenda. Getting money out of politics is really important. Fighting racism, and I applaud the League for its new dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's crucial. Teddy Roosevelt said we can't have a real democracy unless we're approaching economic democracy. I think that's important. Justice Louis Brandeis said many years ago, we got to make a choice. We can have a democracy or we could have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. So we got to make a choice there too. We're going in the opposite direction on that one. So there are a lot of issues that concern us very much at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. And again, this rise of authoritarianism is one has just been petrifying me for the last 3 years, and especially the last 3 weeks. And let me give you a book to read on that question. It's called How Democracies Die. It's by 2 Harvard professors, How Democracies Die. It came out a couple years ago, and it's very sobering. Fighting Bob LaFollette 100 years ago said the cure for the ills of democracy is more democracy. We need more democracy desperately right now in the United States, and we need more democracy right now pretty desperately here in Wisconsin. So I congratulate all of you for working on issues to give us more democracy. And I'm just happy to be able to speak with you today and happy to be working day in and day out with you all on these issues of defending democracy and empowering voters. So happy to take any questions that you might have.
That's a lot. Brian, you had a question.
Yes. Hey, thanks, Matt. I remember Anthony Kennedy, former Supreme Court justice, with other cases that had come before the Supreme Court, had said, geez, just give me a method. I can't tell how much we've been gerrymandered, right? And then Whitford came along and they developed a very good and detailed method as to exactly how that was going to work. They presented their case in front of the Supreme Court, so they understood exactly how much gerrymandering was occurring in Wisconsin, and then kicked it back down to lower courts. Then they took up the Maryland court. I thought this was pretty darn sneaky. They took up the Maryland case and then said, oh, by the way, we cannot hear this anymore. There's no way to determine this, after he had just been presented in detail with a method of how to do that. So I found that really very hard to take. And I know it won't come in front of the Supreme Court again. He's closed the door. But the method that was used there was very detailed and very convincing as to the size and scope of the problem. And mathematically, not hard to understand. So I just wonder how much more can we put that in play, that methodology, and get that out there in front of people? What's the plan to use that?
Well, Brian, you're right. There was a yardstick that the Whitford plaintiffs developed that would measure a degree of partisanship that was unconstitutional. And Justice Kennedy was, before he got off the court, was an ally of those of us who were fighting for banning gerrymandering. And when he got off the court, that was a blow. And I think Chief Justice Roberts was playing some crafty games there by sending it back to the lower court and knowing that there was a good chance that Kennedy was going to get off the court then, and then they were going to be able to just say, forget it, we're not going to deal with this. But I do think it's important to show that there are ways to measure gerrymandering, whether Republicans are doing it or Democrats, and that we ought to look back at that case at the US Supreme Court, not just Whitford, but the decision, the dissent and the decision in the Maryland and North Carolina case by Elena Kagan, Justice Kagan, was tremendous. She said that, you know, that basically the Wisconsin case didn't really need to be sent back to hear again because everybody's rights were violated on a freedom of association claim. Because if you're a Democrat and Republicans are rigging the map against you, your ability to associate with fellow Democrats has been impaired and violated. So I think her dissent, just like Justice John Paul Stevens' dissent in the Citizens United case, will live on and will be the basis of a new decision by a Supreme Court down the road if there's a better composition on those courts. But that's a long, long game.
Great, thank you so much. Linda, you have a question?
Yes, I don't know how familiar people are with the recent petition to the Wisconsin Supreme Court to change the rules to bypass the lower courts for any gerrymandering case. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts or predictions on what might happen with that, Matt.
Sure. This was a petition brought by Scott Jensen and the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Scott Jensen is the former disgraced Speaker of the Assembly who was convicted of a crime of doing political campaigning on the people's time, the people's dime back during the caucus scandal 2001, I think it was. Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty is the right-wing law firm that has been a full employment practice for conservative lawyers over the last couple of years because they've been filing lawsuits left and right. This lawsuit is about the process by which legal challenges will be heard in court. And Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty and Scott Jensen wants all those challenges to be funneled directly up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, not go to federal court, not go to the circuit court level in Wisconsin and then to an appellate court, but just, you know, do not pass go, but we're going to just go directly, not to jail, but to the Wisconsin Supreme Court for original jurisdiction on the hope that, again, they're now slim, thanks to Judy Karofsky, their slim 4-3 majority will affirm the maps that they want. One of the problems with this petition, not only, I mean, I'm for things going through the regular legal channels. Let's get factual cases, the factual case, let's determine that at the trial level. That's what trials are for. And then go to an appellate level and then go to the Wisconsin Supreme Court if it wants to hear it, not just throw everything up straight to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is happening more and more. And I think that's a dangerous precedent. The other problem with the petition that annoys me, and I know it annoys the league, both of us submitted comments to this Wisconsin Supreme Court, is that the petition would preference the political parties to be able to testify as to the validity of the maps, but wouldn't allow for nonprofit groups or other outside groups necessarily to get involved. And, you know, our mission, you know, is for fair maps, one of our missions, as is one of yours. And if they're not going to let the League of Women Voters go in and talk to them or have a brief, you know, that seems crazy just to let the political parties wrestle. They're not the only people, they're not the only groups with interest in this issue. I do want to recognize that the League of Women Voters, on an aside, on a tangent, has also been begging the Wisconsin Supreme Court to have better recusal rules on when judges and justices should recognize that there's a conflict of interest or an apparent conflict of interest and back off and not sit on a case. But rather than adopt the League of Women Voters standard, they adopted a standard that they had actually adopted language that was written directly, explicitly, word for word by the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and Wisconsin Realtors Association as to what their recusal rules are, which I got to tell you, it's pretty lax. It's up to the judge and justice to decide whether actually they have a conflict of interest or not. So anyway, that's another chapter in my book. We need better recusal rules on the courts. But I do think this petition brought by the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, I don't know if the court is going to adopt it or not, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. That will be a signal, I think, as to whether the Wisconsin Supreme Court will act as a rubber stamp on the new maps that are going to be drawn later this spring.
Thank you so much. So Penny made a comment about the districts passing, and a lot of the comments are talking about we do need legislative contacts. So Penny wrote, here's an interesting fact. Because the referendums and resolutions being passed in so many counties, there is only one state Senate district and only 5 state assembly districts without a county referendum or a referendum passed by a district. How do you feel that our legislative bodies will really react to those and support those referenda?
Well, I'm urging that there at least be a hearing. I mean, the amazing thing is there was no hearing. There's been no hearing the last couple of years. I remember last year I went to the that same committee on campaigns and elections that co-chaired the meeting yesterday that Ron Tussler is chair of. And you guys must know Ron Tussler because he's from there, right? I went there. There was a ridiculous, benign, little meaningless bill that they were talking about rather than talking about issues on redistricting or money in politics. So I went in there and said, I got no problem with what this current bill is. I think it was that candidates who aren't elected officials who are not going to run for re-election need to tell the public they're not going to do it earlier than was currently required. It was just kind of one of those small things. A good thing, but a small thing. Anyway, I went in there to give a 2-minute testimony on saying, you know, I'm at Rothschild from the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. I agree with this bill. It seems to be perfectly sensible to me. But what I'd like to say in my remaining 90 seconds is that, you know, why aren't we having a hearing on redistricting? Why aren't we having a hearing on money in politics? Why aren't we having a hearing on voter suppression? And before I could get 2 more sentences out, Ron Tussler said, you can't go on from there. And I said, well, look, I've been to a ton of hearings and I've seen people testify and wander all over hell's half acre for 5 minutes without being interrupted. Just give me my 90 seconds here. But I wasn't able to finish my testimony. But mostly I just wanted a hearing on nonpartisan redistricting. And when, as you're saying, and as Penny is saying, when we have 83% of the people of Wisconsin represented by counties now that have demonstrated that they want to see a nonpartisan independent redistricting and banning gerrymandering, why can't we at a minimum have a public hearing on it by our own elected officials? So I'm hoping that Chairman Tussler will give us a hearing. I'm not going to bet the farm on it. He did tell me at one point that he thought he would have a hearing, but that was before things got really heated over the last month. And I'm sure every Republican elected official is just getting a ton of emails and calls from this authoritarian base that Trump has ginned up. And so they're all scared. I think they're scared of the base at this point. So I don't know if they'll do anything that is, what worries me now is what we saw yesterday is going to lead to a lot of legislation introduced by Republicans in Wisconsin and around the country, actually, to roll back some of the voting rights gains that we've made, gains with absentee ballots. Maybe they'll take away same-day registration too, for that matter. But I think they're going to make it a lot harder for people to vote, and using these bogus fraud claims as a pretext to change the law in Wisconsin. So we're going to have a lot of work to do defensively on voter rights also, as well as trying to move the ball forward on gerrymandering in the next session.
Great. Thank you so much. Karen Nelson, you have a question?
Yes, good morning, all. Thank you, Matt, for this extremely educational presentation. I testified before the People's Commission along with Eric Holder, a former AG. Unfortunately, and I said this, unfortunately, voter suppression and racial exclusion from civic participation is so American that to speak up makes some people question that person's patriotism. In 1857, yes, 1857, Frederick Douglass said that power concedes nothing without a fight. We're fighting at the grounds level, but how can we demand power-hungry politicians, regardless of party, compete on a level playing field when they won't even show up for a fair fight, as you just described from yesterday?
Well, Karen, I mean, this is one of the critical issues that's concerning me. And I love that Frederick Douglass quote, by the way. People want the crops without the thunder and the lightning. I just love that quote. But this is the real dilemma. I think that a lot of us in the pro-democracy nonprofit sector need to wrap our heads around. How do we get legislators to listen to us? How do we beat back this white supremacist movement and this authoritarian movement that is moving together and growing here, or at least much more visible than ever before? And this is a real scary time for our democracy. I don't want to sugarcoat it at all. In fact, I was talking to a program officer at the Joyce Foundation just yesterday about, first we were talking about gerrymandering in Wisconsin and how could they help, but we also said, there's this big issue staring us in the face here that's not going to go away on January 20th. And that's why I think that's why I'm glad that the league is dedicating some work toward this issue of racial justice and racial equity. But we all need to figure out, hell, how do we talk to our neighbors who are flying Trump flags? And I have a neighbor, I live 10 miles south of Madison. And the thing that bugs me about it more than anything is I'm a bird watcher and they're bird watchers. They've got 10 feeders up. And yet they're flying a Trump flag when Trump wants to get rid of the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, wants to get rid of the Migratory Bird Treaty. And, if you like birds, why are you for this guy? So, but, I got to figure out a way how to knock on their door and talk to them. But, this racism that is out there, combined with this sense that, America's losing its standing in the world, we got to make America great again, combined with, your life stinks and no one's done anything for your life, which is the pitch that Trump was making to people. I mean, all this, and the fact that that now you can say it's okay for a president to say, number one, I'm not going to guarantee a peaceful transfer of power. Number two, I'm going to say there is widespread fraud when every judge said there isn't. Number three, I'm going to still say we're going to overturn this election. And this morning he's saying he's going to still fight. And some of his advisors are telling him to impose martial law. I mean, one thing we need to do, assuming that Biden is sworn in on January 20th, is urge our legislature in Washington to try to fix this problem so a president can't destroy our democracy. But the way things are, where leaders of the Republican Party, and again, in How Democracies Die, they say there's an obligation for leaders of a party, elected officials, when they see someone who is toxic to democracy, to call that out. I mean, when we have people like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell who are fronting for this guy and know better, they know in their heart of hearts that this guy is a psychotic narcissist and is really threatening the foundation and the pillars of our democracy. For those people to let this happen, that's how Germany went down fast. And I think we need to recognize that democracies are fragile, and we're at a really fragile point here. And our system of checks and balances, yes, the Supreme Court yesterday made a good decision. That doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. And I think a lot of work has to be done by our elected officials. A lot of work has to be done citizen to citizen, and somehow find a way to to lance this boil of authoritarianism that is threatening our democracy. And that's, you know, I don't write about that in my book because I was just writing about, I was not thinking it was going to go from so bad to so worse, but it has gone from so bad to so worse here over the last, since election day. I mean, I was always worried that Trump might not leave office. And, you know, when I was giving speeches all across Wisconsin, I'd say that and people would think, well, you know, he's off his rocker now because, you know, no one's ever done that before. And that's not going to happen. But lo and behold, that's where we're at.
So we're going to try and wrap this up, but in some of your closing remarks, would you please help us? We need to, and this is always the League of Women Voters, we like to conclude every one of our programs with a call for action. And our call for action is seriously to contact our state and federal legislators right now. And in particular for our state legislators, how do we address and how do we inform community members around us the importance of gerrymandering in simple lay people terms? What is gerrymandering? Why is it so bad? And so that we can approach our community members as well as our legislators.
Sure. I mean, I think we should just tell our legislators and our community members we should have a level playing field and a fair process every 10 years when we're drawing lines, redrawing lines on a map to give us new districts as required by the Constitution. And no political party, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, should be able to rig a map to keep themselves in power for 10 more years. And it's just as simple as that. And that their solutions are out there. Iowa solved it. If Iowa can do it, Wisconsin can do it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this
It's my pleasure.
information. And it really is, it's a lot because like you said, we are in a very messy federal position right now, very messy democracy. We are the defenders of democracy as the League of Women Voters. And the way we can defend democracy, everybody, is to contact your legislators, is to email them, write them little postcards, and let them know we need fair maps. We need them and we want them done in a nonpartisan way. All right. So any other comments you want to close with at all, Matt?
No, just, you know, my hat's off to all of you for doing all the great work that you're doing up in the Appleton area, and know that there are people all over the state, not only in league chapters, but in with other organizations that are doing a lot of great work, and that gives me hope. And there are a lot of younger people, a lot younger than I am, who are doing a lot of great work too. So that gives me hope as well.
Great, thank you